Good afternoon and welcome to the Health Leaders Patient Financial Experience Now Online Summit. My name is Amanda Norris and I'm the Revenue Cycle Editor for Health Leaders and will serve as your moderator for today's event. Our closing panel session of today's event is titled Boost Patient Satisfaction Scores Through Streamlined Billing, sponsored by iVitaFi. Thank you to our sponsor and to you and our audience for participating. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping details. Our program will be 60 minutes in length. Note that an on-demand version of this program will be available approximately one day after the completion of the event and can be accessed using the same login link that you used for the live program. To ensure that you can see all the content for the event, please maximize your event window and be sure to adjust your computer volume settings and/or PC speakers for optimal sound quality. Next, you'll find a resources list for today's webinar in the upper right of your screen. Here we have listed the event program guide for you to download that provides topic and panelist information from your session, along with materials from our sponsor. At the bottom of your console are multiple widgets you can use. To submit a question, click on the Q&A widget. It may be open already and appear on the left side of your screen. You may submit questions at any time during the presentation. However, please note that it's likely that your questions will not be answered until the Q&A portion of the program. Finally, should you experience any technical difficulties during today's program and need assistance, please click on the Help widget, which has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have Chris Cox. He's Senior Vice President of Product and Strategy for iVitaFi, and Chris Johnson, Vice President of Revenue Cycle Management at Atrium Health. So thank you both for joining me today. And with that, let's start our discussion. Bring it up. Okay, so what are some of the pros and cons of the current billing processes that you are seeing in the healthcare industry? Chris Johnson, who I'm going to call CJ for this session, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, Amanda, be glad to do it. And one of the things they asked us to do, maybe with that a little bit to your introduction, maybe just some quick background. So a little bit of that. I've been with Atrium Health for 24 years in revenue cycle management of some kind for, let's just say 30 plus years and leave it at that because it's been my career, my entire adult life. So to give you a little perspective of where I am, the organization that I come from, we're a little over 11 billion in net patient revenue and go across North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. So glad to be with you today, and hopefully we can share some information that will be helpful. So in answer to your question about some of the pros and cons of the current billing processes, I'd list out a few pros that I see going on. I think there is clearly more of a move toward pricing transparency, which ultimately I think will be good for our patients. I know it's been a difficult journey for a lot of us, and the rules that require us to do some of this don't always line up with reality of either what we can do or what needs to be done. But I still believe that it should be considered a pro because I think ultimately it's going to give patients more information about what they will ultimately owe or what's coming out for them. The other pro I would say that I see going on in the environment right this minute is that the patient financial experience is really beginning to carry the not the same level of importance necessary as the clinical side. Clearly, clinical care comes first, but it's certainly now being perceived as an integral part of the overall patient care. More and more, it's the mindset is my patient financial experience needs to follow the same path as my clinical experience, and they both need to be phenomenal in order for our patients to be satisfied with the organization, providing the service. And again, I think that's a good thing. Another pro that I would say I see going on at the moment is the use of technology in the revenue cycle space. We're opening up more information or more and more information to the patients through the use of online portals. We are moving down multiple payment paths, trying to make that a component of the patient experience as easy as it can be. Really, it's the goal of to give the patient the information they want, when they want it, where they want it, and how they want it, including the ability to to make payments and to interact with us on their financial issues. And then probably the other pro, or the last pro I kind of jotted down some notes on, were the growth of the payment plan options that are in the marketplace today. I think every provider organization is dealing with patients who have higher and higher out-of-pocket expenses. It is just a fact that patients are routinely not prepared to pay the out-of-pocket expenses that they have in one payment. When you carry, $3,000, $5,000, in some cases $10,000 out-of-pocket maxes, most patients aren't walking around with either that kind of money or the ability to write a check at one point in time. And I think the industry is responding to that, and providers are responding to that to try to make the payment mechanism for those out-of-pocket expenses easier for patients to navigate. Let me throw out a couple of cons, or you want to have Chris do pros first, or how do you want us to do that?
Yeah, I can jump in. Chris, I think you looked at my notes before reading off your pros. Because I actually had almost all of the same talking points. We're seeing providers adopting new technology and having that focus on the patient billing experience. And I think it's kind of come into focus where having a poor patient billing experience kind of sours the entire relationship that patient has with the provider, and ultimately causes patient leakage to other networks and providers. So we are seeing that there is a more intense focus on the patient and that patient experience, the ability to adopt new technology to drive that seamless interaction that consumers have, specifically outside of healthcare. They're starting to demand that same type of experience in healthcare. So seeing that direction shift, I think, has been really positive.
And Chris, I think that's a really good point. I would just share with you, we would often say the patient experience was great and everything was phenomenal until they got the bill, right? And then all of a sudden, the food was cold, or the room was cold, or and so again, I do think it's a move towards Chris, to your point, the entire experience has to be perceived at the same level, and we can't, as provider organizations, let the billing component of it sour the patient experience. So I think that's an excellent point. Maybe you want to talk about a few cons, because I think there are some in the market today. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
One that I would throw out is I would just say, again, having done this my entire career, and we are making a lot of progress. We we talk about things like patient portal, giving patients more information real time, on demand, when they want it. All of those things are good, and I think that we should be doing them. But there are cons we're doing. Even with all of that, the healthcare billing that we do, it continues to be a very complex process. When you have the provider involved and the patient involved and the payer involved, and our mechanism for billing, CPT codes, ICD codes, the way we are reimbursed from insurance companies, quite frankly, all of which is generally a foreign language to the patients that we serve, just makes the process still more complicated than, I guess, quite frankly, we would want it to be. Another interesting component of what we do in our industry, even today, we still, I think almost every provider still bills the gross charge level. And we continue to do that as an industry, even though often in conversation we say, well, gross charges are really meaningless, right? Well, if they're so meaningless, why are we still using them? But in fact, we do. And we focus on the patient's out of pocket, right? We say, well, what the patient is really interested in is their out of pocket expense. And I agree with that. I do believe that's true. A patient asks for Amanda.
You're good. We can still hear you.
Okay, well, I'm glad you can hear me because I lost all visual and okay. So if you can hear me good, we'll just keep on going. I'm not sure what happened. I see none of you guys, but that's okay. But when we send a patient an itemized bill and they see their gross charges for, $100,000, all of a sudden they really are interested in those gross charges, not just what their out-of-pocket is. So again, I think it continues to be, quite honestly, more complex than it needs to be. And as an industry, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I think one other component that we continue to deal with in this industry is, in a lot of cases, patients continue to receive multiple bills from different providers for one episode of care. I think that can be very confusing for patients. And again, it's not a problem that we've successfully fixed at this point. We still have the issue with our patient statements, but our patient statements don't always align with the explanation of benefits that the patient may receive from their insurance company. And so I think there are a number of things that while we obviously are continuing to improve and give better information to our patients, we have a long way to go in making this industry and making this process truly patient friendly. So a few of the cons I thought of when you posed that question to us.
Yeah, and I think from my side, and Chris, all good points. I think being able to articulate to patients how much they owe in a clear and concise manner is just critical. And where I look at the revenue cycle and where there's opportunities to improve is having that discussion with the patients about their bill more frequently. I see it time and time again where throughout the continuum of care, the billing aspect of services is just not discussed. And even when a patient would proactively ask, well, how much does this cost? That discussion gets, oh, no, we'll send you a bill. So bringing that conversation forward and setting the expectation that, you haven't met your deductible and you will have an out-of-pocket and it is estimated to be X, will just help create that experience such that when they get their bill, it's not a total and complete surprise. So I see that as an opportunity, and it starts as early as scheduling or when you check in at registration, right. And even at checkout. So just all the different touch points, having that discussion with the patient, and just setting the right expectations. And then I think the other area that we can improve in this industry is on the back end. So after the statements are going out and phone calls are being made to try to collect on the open balances. I don't know about you guys, but I've never received a phone call where I pick up the phone. I'm like, hey, you caught me at a great time. I'm so happy you called me, right? At all times are equally inconvenient. And finding a better medium to contact patients, or even giving them the ability to schedule a call, where perhaps you get a text and say, would you like to schedule a call with us to discuss your bill? Those are some areas where I think we could make it a little bit more friendly and ultimately help improve the financial results of the collections process.
Awesome. Thank you both. Okay, so why is it imperative to improve the patient billing experience? Chris Cox, did you want to start this one?
Yeah, so, and I kind of touched on it earlier. That patient billing experience really affects how the patient will ultimately feel about their experience at that provider, regardless of how the clinical care went. So it's really important for patient leakage. Providers lose on average between 10 to 30% of revenue as a result of patient leakage, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars in losses per year. In a recent study, that CEDAR conducted, 93% of healthcare consumers indicated that a poor billing experience would dissuade them from returning back to the hospital for future care. So it's just really, really important that that we're setting the right expectations, right? So that way, when they get the bill, they're not surprised. And the whole point is, okay, we want you to not only just pay your bill, but we want you to come back. So that patient leakage is just incredibly important to one, track and monitor and kind of have a plan on how to minimize it moving forward.
And Amanda, I would follow up with that. Chris might take a little different, but you agree 100% with what you're saying. For providers, it is critical that our patients come back, right? So we won't repeat business. Obviously that's how we stay in business. So we want that experience to be good. So when the patient leaves, they have a really good service. I think well, when I need futures, and we go back there. So that is clearly what component of it. But I think, Amanda, to your question, why imperative to improve the process, I think there's another component of that, or another side of it. I think one piece of that is patient expectations continue to increase, right? They expect the process to work well. They expect to know what they're going to go out of pocket, just like they do in any other business. So they expect us to rise to that occasion. But to me, the other component of that is if we don't, as providers, as the industry of providers, if we don't figure out, other people are going to attempt to figure it out for us. And I think that you see that happening now. I mean, think about the surprise billing regulations, right? That's an attempt to say, okay, providers, you need to do this. You need to have transparency. You need to provide information to your patients. And quite frankly, I'm on the provider side and have been my entire career, right? And I would just share again what you're getting today is Chris Johnson's opinion, and in my opinion, we can sometimes be our own worst enemy, right? If you think about surprise billing, and you think about the fact that a patient comes to, say for example, your emergency room to get care, and the hospital is in network, but the ER physicians are not. Okay. How is the patient supposed to know that? Right. So these, I'm just saying, there's some problems, quite frankly, in my opinion, I think we should have fixed ourselves a long time ago. And my point is, to your question, if we don't do some of these things, other people who think that they know our industry and know how it should be run are going to force us into some of those. And when that happens, it generally doesn't work well. And I often see it doesn't really provide the outcome that the patients really need and that we all want. I mean, again, you think about price and transparency, right? So everybody's mandated for price and transparency, but quite frankly, a lot of the tools that are mandated that are available, when you think of a machine readable format for price and transparency, how does that benefit a patient if you get right down to it, right? What's the patient going to do with a file which they can't use? And we say, okay, this is not for your use, but hey, by the way, it has to be out here. So again, I think sometimes we need to make sure we should be leading the charge to make this easier and make it a better experience for a patient. I mean, recently, I'm sure, a lot of the people that are attending today have seen the message that came out, or the directive that came out from the White House on medical billing. So yeah, here's another component that we're going to now be trying to figure out what are the implications for that. If you think about the upcoming changes to credit reporting and the changes that the three major bureaus are making to the changes that relates to medical debt, I would just say we need to be leading, and we need to be in the forefront of this. We do not need to be leading from behind and reacting to things that, as providers, we for the benefit of our patients, need to figure out how do we make this as patient friendly as it can be. So I think there is a patient experience component. Again, we don't want patient leakage. We don't want our patients going other places. We want that repeat business. But again, I think there's a regulatory component of it that, again, external forces continue to say, well, this is what you should be doing, and since you don't seem to be, let us tell you how to do it. Again, and I don't think that gets the desired outcome for the provider or for the patient, quite frankly.
Oh, really good comment, Chris. I think, with the White House coming out with that guidance on reporting to the bureaus, it's certainly, and you see the CFPB now starting to examine this space. It really puts the onus on us for coming up with patient-friendly solutions to try and get ahead of some of this. And you had mentioned it before, that use of extended payment plans is one of those very patient-friendly solutions that kind of checks a lot of boxes. That's a win for a lot of different people. And certainly, I would imagine the regulatory agencies would look at that in a favorable light as well.
I would agree, absolutely.
Great. So how has the implementation of digital patient engagement and payment platforms, such as a patient portal, improved patient experience? Chris Johnson, I'll have you start on this one.
Okay. So I would say the move to digital formats has been a great benefit to the patients. I mean, if you think of things like the patient portal, we are providing more access to patients regarding not only their clinical information, but their financial experience with us. In some cases, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, right? I mean, I can log into my portal with my Atrium at any point that I want to, day or night. I can do that on a mobile device. I can do that, sitting at my desk. So again, I think it's a push, and that technology gives us the ability to put more information at the disposal of the patient, again, when and where they want it. I would tell you, again, for providers, I think another benefit to the move to the digital, in addition to hopefully improving the patient experience, and again, providing the level of service and the level of information that I think patients have come to expect, there's a tremendous amount of savings that can be gained for the provider in the use of some of this technology. I mean, just a very simple example for us is in the area of patient statements. When we, in the system that we use now, like I'm sure most providers have the ability for e-statements. And again, while our adoption rate is not 90%, it continues to grow. But we already see hundreds of thousands of dollars in expense reduction every year from reducing the number of statements that we have to mail, the postage, and all the expense associated with that. So the digital move, in my opinion, not only benefits the patient and again gives them more access, real-time information to their data when and where they want it, but it's a big win, or it can be a big win for the providers in the area of cost containment or expense reduction. And every provider is faced with that right this minute. I mean, we're all challenged every single year to do more with less, right? So anytime we can carve out cost through the use of automation and improve the experience for the patients and give them more information, more real-time information through digital capacities, I mean, that's a win-win, right? I mean, that's a win for the patient. That's a win for the provider. So I think the combination of those things really is improving the patient experience. I think it's moving us to the same level of playing field with a lot of other industries where we as consumers have an expectation that I should be able to access information 24 hours, 7 days a week, and get out of the routine 9 to 5 expectation that healthcare providers have historically lived in. So automation can go too far. I will say that. I think I will say I don't think healthcare providers, I hope, never lose the personal touch. But there's a tremendous amount of efficiency and cost savings that can be gained through digital use and automation if we do it correctly. So I think it could be a big win.
Yeah, and to add to that, Chris, there's almost like two sides of that cost reduction, right? If you're communicating with patients in a manner that they want to be communicated with, they're more likely to pay sooner, right? So the number of statements that you're sending now is reduced, and especially if you're using these digital engagement platforms, the cost of a text message or an email is
Right.
infinitely cheaper than all that postage and paper and the lettering costs. Um, we
Absolutely.
actually, yeah, no. We actually conducted a patient survey, and we asked patients what their preferred communication channel was. And it was really interesting that um, it was text, email, and paper statements were how they preferred to be communicated with. And those texts and emails driving them to that online portal, which is nice because, to your point, it's 24 hours a day. Most people don't think about their healthcare bills, during the hours of 8 to 5 while they're at work, right? It's after dinner, it's before they go to work that next morning, it's whenever they can find just some spare time. So having those portals with chatbots and make tailoring that experience to them, I just think is so important. um, and having the without requiring a direct human interaction. I think people are more and more comfortable in interacting with their phones or their computers to go through the billing process as opposed to having to talk to somebody over the phone.
I 100% agree with you, Chris. I will say it is it's just a fact, but it is a sad commentary um, on our society when we're moving to a situation where we would all prefer not to talk to a human. And so when the experience works, and it works well, you're absolutely right. That's what we hear more and more, that our patients expect. I want to be able to pay my bill. I want to be able to ask a question. I want to be able to get a copy of my itemized bill. And I don't have to talk to anybody to do that. I want to just be able to self-service. And we're continuing down that path. One thing so we have the chat option so people can, enter into a chat asking questions, and we have, somebody on the other end, of course, responding. They can submit requests through email, and then, we'll answer those. They can, of course, call. We obviously still have our call center. From the payment standpoint, our next step, and we are almost there. I was hoping we might be able to say we were already there by the time of this presentation today, but we're almost there, is that literally we will notify patients via text of their new balance, and they literally will be able to pay that balance if they choose, just by responding to that text. So they don't have to go, they won't have to get the text and then go to the portal. Literally, they'll be able to respond and take care of that entire interaction with the device that almost every one of us hold in our hand every day, right? So again, it's trying to figure out what's the best method for that particular patient. How do they want to be communicated with, and how do they want to be able to interact with us, and then us using that to, again, hit that positive patient financial experience.
Oh, I think that's a perfect segue, Chris, into our next question.
Okay, so our next question is, when it comes to patient payments, what payment options, such as recourse or non-recourse loans, seem to be driving the industry? Chris Cox, do you want to start off here?
Yeah. So real quick, sometimes there's confusion around what is a recourse loan, what is a non-recourse loan. Just to provide some air cover, effectively, if a patient defaults on a recourse loan, the defaulted balance is placed back to the provider. If the loan were non-recourse and the patient defaults, the balances remains on the lender's balance sheet. So the non-recourse lender is effectively responsible for the balance, regardless of whether or not it's paid. So we see actually there are absolute appropriate times for recourse and non-recourse loans. What we see in the market is typically if a provider can use a recourse loan program and have a low recourse rate, it is absolutely the correct program to use. Because if you're able to maintain those low recourse rates, that means you're ultimately helping your patient population, and you're not having to pay a larger fee for those services. Now, some myths that I've seen kind of out there in the marketplace around non-recourse lending is that there's a credit requirement or a credit score requirement in order to qualify. Something that I've been really, really happy to see is across, I think, most of the non-recourse lenders in this space, they're targeting, approval rates upwards of 90%, which is really, really good. And that's specifically in the acute care provider space. As you get into the more elective space, you see more kind of selective credit profiling practices. There's this myth on whether or not recourse loans are cheaper than non-recourse loans, and that is on its face absolutely true for the most part. Now, when you think about how to price recourse loans relative to non-recourse loan programs, basically you'd have to look at the price of the program in addition to your recourse rate in order to then compare that number to a non-recourse program. So that's a really important consideration as you're thinking about these patient-friendly extended payment plans. And then the third note that I have written down here is just making sure that the program is zero interest. So patients, don't want to have to pay interest on, healthcare bills. And everything that I've seen in the industry is actually been really positive in that there typically isn't any retroactive interest or origination charges. So the APRs are truly 0%. So just kind of some thoughts on the industry. I'd love to hear, Chris, your perspective, because I believe Atrium uses a patient financing program.
We do, and you might be surprised to hear me say that a lot of my thoughts and your thoughts are going to line up pretty closely. As it relates to recourse versus non-recourse, I agree with you 100%, Chris. I don't believe there is a one-size-fits-all, right? So I don't think it's, okay, either recourse is great or non-recourse is great. I think a lot of it, quite frankly, is driven by the needs of the organization, from a cash flow standpoint, and the cost of those types of programs. The other component that I might touch on for just a second too is the concept or the idea that providers get into, because there really sometimes seems to be a real divide of doing payment plans internally versus outsourcing them at all. And a lot of providers, which is interesting to me, would say, well, we're going to do all of our payment plans internally because we can do it at no cost. And I would just challenge that, because there is a cost. I mean, if you decide to do it internally, and I'm not saying that's a good or bad idea, I'm just saying there are costs associated with that. There's, of course, statement cost and FTE cost and call center cost. So a provider saying, well, we're going to do this in-house because it doesn't cost us, might need to look back and see what their hidden costs are, because they really are there. In the case of the recourse versus non-recourse, again, I don't think there's a right or a wrong or a one-size-fits-all. I think it's got to be driven by the facility and what they're ultimately going to pay for that service. I would tell you the model that we use, and quite frankly, one that I like best, I probably would say that because we use it, right? But I still think it is a very good model, is that it has both of those. The program that we use has a funded model and it has an unfunded model. And so, to your point, recourse is not bad if you manage it, right? And so in the model that we use, we have accounts that are funded, but we've looked back over history to have a real good feel of what accounts are most likely to pay. And then those then are funded, and our recourse rate on those is very low. On the other hand, if we've got a population of accounts that may not pay out so well or may be more difficult, those are not funded. They're still managed externally. At Atrium, we don't have an internal payment plan option. We really do partner with a third-party company to do this for us, but we run multiple programs under that company or under that partner to do this for us. So we have funded accounts and they do carry recourse. Our recourse is very, very low, but again, we balance that. And I think that's really important because, I mean, in my opinion, having done this for a long time, I don't care how you peel this onion or slice the potato, whatever you want to call it, the self-pay dollar, it is critical to our mission, it's critical to what we do, but it is the most expensive money that we collect. So we need to find the most efficient and effective ways that we can collect those dollars. And I would just say to revenue cycle peers, I really think you need to look at the cost of what you're collecting and the return on investment. We have just chosen to have a partner do that business for us and use our internal resources to focus for on payments, and we're going to get a higher return on the dollar. And again, we decided to outsource that focus to people who, I think, are better at it than we are. The other thing I would just put on the table for any organization that's looking at a payment plan model, I think it is very important that your program has a payment option for every patient. And that's one thing that's been very, very important to us. There are a lot of programs out there that will set up a payment arrangement, provide a loan, whatever you want to classify that as, to patients who can pay. And they have a really good history of paying, so we know it's a safe venture, right? Any provider has a much broader patient population of that. We have patients who really pay very well. We have patients that take a little longer. We have patients who can't pay, or patients that really need a very patient-friendly payment plan. And so I would just encourage providers when you're looking at that to make sure that whatever path you go down, you have an option for any patient that would come to you and need some type of long-term payment plan, regardless of the model. Again, I think recourse, non-recourse, I think it really comes down to the organization, what they want to incur from an expense standpoint, and what they need from a cash flow standpoint.
Yeah, because what you would pay, that premium that you pay for a non-recourse loan, you get in return a little bit more simplicity in funding and reconciliation, where you don't have to try to determine who has the balance and what is the balance and who's communicating with the patient and what's the messaging. But there, you do have that premium that you pay in the form of non-recourse loans, but it's simpler and just takes it off the books. Now, one thing, Chris, that you had mentioned is having those payment options. I don't hear enough about affordability and structuring the payment plans to be affordable and to fit that patient with where they are, and making sure that, I see both ends of the spectrum, where on one side, providers have payment plans that run out for 37 years at, $20 a month. And then others that say, hey, we only offer this, and we can't work outside that box. So finding a solution for the patient that makes sense for them and allows them to then have that monthly payment that doesn't overly put too much burden on them.
So what are you seeing in the healthcare industry when it comes to in-house billing teams? Are more of these functions being outsourced? Chris Cox, would you like to start this one?
Sure. So we our clients have all different types of models, doing it in-house, outsourcing it, hybrid models. So we partner with a bunch of different teams We see there's a shift towards the kind of the day one early out, and having to partner with those vendors to try and maintain a line of sight to what's the consumer experience or what's the patient experience. So, it's kind of a tough question to answer from my perspective as a vendor, because we don't really outsource it, but we see, we see a lot of different models from the provider side.
So Amanda, what I would add to that from the provider side, I really think that strategic outsourcing of revenue cycle components is a smart move for any provider organization. I've long believed and shared that I don't think any organization, provider or non-provider, it can be good at everything, right? There are core components of what we do that we do very well. There are other pieces of that I think if we do some analysis we may not be so good at. I think most providers are good at insurance billing and insurance follow-up. I mean, if your system is running well, if you build your edits and all of those things which we should do and we should have in place, getting claims out the door, getting them paid, and converting those to cash really should be our bread and butter. I mean, that in my way of thinking, that's what we as providers are good at. And I know some of that is driven by size and scale, right? Usually larger organizations can have more specialty than, say, the small community hospital. But in almost any environment, billing and follow-up are kind of core components of what providers do. I think in areas of complex claims, and when I say that, I think of things like TPL accounts or MBA, maybe estates or program workers' comp. It just is some examples of things that can become more complicated to collect. I really think that organizations should look and say, do we do that well? And what we've learned, and certainly what we've done several times over the years, is things that we've done internally that are more complicated. We've said, okay, well, let's give an external party a try and see what happens. And I will just share with you, in a number of cases, we really realized and learned how much money we were leaving on the table because it's not our area of expertise. And even with our size, it always our area of expertise. But I think organizations should be smart and look at those options. I would tell you the other thing I would just throw out that I think providers should be looking at is maybe something that I refer to as safety net vendors. Basically what I mean by that is vendors that go behind what you're doing internally and make sure that you aren't missing appropriate reimbursement, that you aren't leaving money on the table. And when you talk about things like that, I mean, so maybe underpayment review, right? Are we getting paid according to our contract? DRG validation, or is our system working the way it should be? So that, again, we want to be reimbursed appropriately for the work that we do, not under, not over, but appropriately. We want to be reimbursed at what we're supposed to be reimbursed. I think about things like insurance discovery or maybe even Medicaid eligibility as some examples where it doesn't, it's not a bad thing for providers to pull in external resources to help with that. I will, again, say just, from my experience, I personally am not a fan of full revenue revenue cycle outsourcing for providers. I think it loses, just in my opinion, some connection between the patient and the organization. And I know all the net safety things can be in place, and they are so forth. I'm just sharing from my perspective. I'm not a fan of full revenue cycle outsourcing. Long term, I don't see it work well. I see organizations do it, and then a few years later, I see them, go down a different path. And I've yet to see a case, again, and this is just me, but I've yet to see a case where ultimately it's less expensive to do a full revenue cycle outsourcing operation. Now, the caveat to that is clearly that can be driven by markets. Right? I mean, you can have a small community hospital, you can have a community where it's very the type of talent that you need, experience base, and so forth. I'm not saying it's never the right option, but it wouldn't be my go-to for full revenue cycle outsourcing. I think strategic use of business partners is a smart move on any revenue cycle leaders.
Thank you. So what resources are you seeing in the industry that can help boost the patient financial experience when it comes to charity care or Medicaid offerings? Chris Johnson, would you like to start on this one?
So Chris, I'll do my part really quick, and then you chime in and see if we line up, or if you can help me out here. In both of those cases, or in both of those segments of the self-pay population, clearly in today's market, there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of business partners out there that offer presumptive eligibility tools for both charity care, financial assistance, and Medicaid. And there's a ton of data, socioeconomic data out there that can help us drive decisions. Quite honestly, I don't know how a provider today cannot use some of that type of automation or technology, because I don't know how they would go through all the volume of accounts, applications, and so forth that they would have to do in order to meet some of the requirements of 501R and all the other regulations that we're under. I'm not sure how you could process all of that manually. So I think those are good. I think those are good tools that have been put in place. You still need the safety net. You still need the check of, okay, is this reliable and realistic? Because if you use any type of automation, especially in the area of financial assistance or Medicaid, there are going to be cases where the data says, Chris Johnson as a patient doesn't have the means to pay his bill, and that may not always be accurate. But on par, the statistics clearly show that it's a valuable tool. And it's a viable tool, and we in fact do use some of those. I would say there's a point though, and it's usually, or certainly I would think, at a balanced threshold where you really do need the more in-depth review, the document review, the interview with the patient or the patient's family, and so forth. But there are a lot of business partners out there offering assistance in that, in both of those spaces. And again, I would just say in today's market, I'm not exactly sure how a provider is getting through all of the work if in fact they don't use some of the automation that's available in that space.
No, I completely agree, Chris. And kind of to add to that, with those tools, making sure that they're made available to patients in multiple settings, meaning if they're standing in front of a registrar and they're going through this process where the registrars can sign in and access this tool to help shepherd the conversation, and then also having the ability for that patient or guarantor to then go home and do it on their own time, right, without having to stand there in front of that registrar and have that in-depth conversation. So having that flexibility to do both will improve your chances of having a successful outcome. But to your point, Chris, I don't understand or can't imagine how to go through that process without that automation. Just from a sheer volume perspective, it just seems untenable.
So what does the future of the patient billing experience look like? What would you like to see implemented within the next 5 years? Chris Cox, do you want to go ahead and take this one?
Sure. So I had an experience when I was checking into a hotel in Denver a few years ago, and it really stuck with me as I was thinking through the kind of parallels between that experience and paying a healthcare bill. After I went to the front desk, I received my key, went up to the room, and by the time I got to my room, I had received a text message, that said, "Hey, Chris, this is Allison. I hope you enjoy your stay. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. I'm here to help." And it was a neat touch in that I had just talked with Allison just a few minutes ago downstairs in the lobby, and here I had a text message from her saying, "Hey, I really hope you enjoy your stay." And this was the hotel wasn't anything special or nice, but it was just a very nice touch that made me feel really appreciated. And then as I was checking out, I got another text saying, "Hey, how would you prefer to receive your statement? Would you like us to print it out and leave it for you under your door, or would you like us to email it to you?" So having this almost concierge-like approach really changed my entire perspective of the hotel, despite the fact that, it wasn't overly clean. It wasn't in a great location. But it was just such a neat interaction. It made me want to go and, use more hotels under that logo. So when I think about the future of healthcare, it's having that white glove concierge type relationship that makes people feel like they're cared for on the human level, right? In addition to the clinical side, and then using all of the tools available to clearly articulate how much is owed, and then giving them as many options to settle that balance as possible. I think it's important to have the conversation about the bill that's owed at every step within the continuum of care, to make sure that there's no surprises. And then once the patient or guarantor agrees that, hey, this bill is mine, I do owe it, I understand it, giving them the ability to pay on their terms in an affordable way, and allowing them to extend those payments over time seamlessly, right? On a mobile friendly application, I think is where I'd like to see us trend towards.
Chris, I 100% agree with you. I think we have to get better, to your point of making that personal touch in the patient financial experience as we know it today. And I would argue that by and large, as providers, we aren't necessarily good at that, or we don't have it down to a fine art yet. I think we're getting better. I think in one point that you made, I think it's really good, and I had actually made a note of it for this question, Amanda. It's like, well, what do you want to see? I think one of the things, kind of like the hotel experience, we need to start gathering, how do our patients want to be communicated to or communicated with? How do they want to pay their bill? I mentioned earlier that we're looking at the option of being able to pay by text or giving text notices to patients about a new balance. But we should be asking, and that's great, and we need to do that. We need to have the online chat and the patient portal and all those things. I think we need to go a little further, though, with the question of, how do you want us to communicate with you about the balance that you're going to owe on your account? In the area of text, or some of the other things that we do, we're going to make that available, but it's available to everybody, right? And we'll send mass messages out and so forth. Maybe I don't want to pay by text. So my question is, as providers, why aren't we asking patients that? When we register a patient, we ask them what their preferred language is, right? Why aren't we saying, and how would you like for us to communicate with you about the balance on your account, those kind of things? A couple other things I would like to see. I'm not sure I'll live long enough to see this, but I would like to see it. And that is a better alignment between the payer and the provider to ultimately drive a good patient financial experience. We still have this push-pull relationship with our payers, and oftentimes, unfortunately, the patient can get caught in the middle of that. I would love to see better alignment there. And then I think we could do simple things. We talk about the portal that we have, and the fact that people can get information 24/7. I can look at the balance of my account. Why can't we work with the payers to do simple things like, one of the comments I made is, a lot of times the EOB that you get as a patient and the statement that we send you from the provider side, they don't always line up, or they're difficult to figure out. Why don't we join together and work with payers to pull the EOB into our portal? So if I'm a patient, I log in, I'm looking at my bill, and then I can automatically see, okay, well, here's what the insurance company paid, and here's my explanation of benefits. I don't have to go somewhere else to try to find that, right? So we make it easier for the patient to see everything they need to see at one stop. Again, not sure I'm going to live long enough to see that, but I think it would be a really great outcome for our patients if we could get close to something like that.
That's great. Thank you both. Thank you both for your insights. I think this was a really awesome discussion today. This brings us to the end, and it brings us to our Q&A portion of the program. So we would now like to invite you to the audience to ask questions of the panelists. So as a reminder, to submit a question, click on the Q&A widget at the bottom of the screen. It may be open already and appear on the left of your screen. So please note that your questions will remain anonymous and will not be viewable by other audience members. So we have one question here. I guess I'll ask it to Chris Cox first, and we'll see. How would you advise handling long-standing no-pay patients if there's no collection agency involved?
So it's, I'm getting a little bit of an echo. No, so I would look at what type of outreach has already been completed. So, you know, was it just for statements? Did you have an agency, or did you internally try to call those patients? If you have the proper documentation and consent to text, leveraging a texting tool to try and drive engagement with the patient to get them to pay. And then also doing, I've seen with some success, doing targeted kind of like payment plan offering, saying, hey, if you sign up now, we can get you into a payment of X that you'll pay over time. So those are just some strategies that I've seen on no pays if a collection agency isn't involved.
Chris Johnson, did you have any advice here?
You know, the only thing I would add, I mean, I agree with Chris 100%. The only thing I might add is in that scenario, if it's a repeat patient, and it sounds like it is, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about a no pay that, you know, again, continues to come to receive services. One recommendation would be to try to interject a financial counselor or a patient advocate or whatever you may call them within your organization, that when the person presents for service the next time can intercept that and maybe on a one-on-one work with the patients that what can we do to help you as we move forward. You know, maybe the person could be eligible for Medicaid but just doesn't know how to pursue it. Maybe they're eligible for financial assistance but don't pursue it. So again, if you could intersect or intercept at the next appointment or the service occurrence, you might be able to learn what the driver is behind why the person is not paying.
Great, thank you. That's great advice. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. If your question wasn't answered, we'll share it with the panelists for follow-up. So I want to thank our panelists once again for an excellent discussion and everyone in our audience for participating. Finally, I want to give a special thanks to our panel sponsors, Inovalon, iVitaFi, and Waystar, and our corporate sponsor, Flywire, for making this event possible. Over the last several hours, we have heard from healthcare experts and our session sponsors about key strategies and tactics for tackling the future needs of healthcare organizations, as well as making sure you are set up for success. We look forward to seeing you again for future Health Leader webinars. This concludes the Health Leaders Patient Financial Experience Now Online Summit. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.